Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Poddin My Noggin. Today, we are joined by a guest by the name of Michelle Steiner. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Perfect, perfect. Welcome, Michelle. How are you?
I am great. How are you today?
I am doing great. The sun is shining and it's a bit warm outside, so I think spring is right around the corner, and I am ready for it.
Yes, same here.
Perfect. So, Michelle, there was things about when you filled out your form and you sent it over to me, there was things about that stood out for me as someone who wants to have a show that elevates, well, women first off, because I'm a feminist, but also just really great stories of people who maybe have been counted out, but then kind of was proved everybody wrong. And I love that there's messaging in that form that I really love, and we're going to talk about that later. But for everybody at home, tell us who Michelle Steiner is.
Well, my name is Michelle Steiner. I live in Pennsylvania with my husband Ron and our two cats, Jack and Sparrow. And I work as a parent educator in a school with students who have disabilities and some who don't. They just need that little extra help. And I also have a blog called, I'm a disability writer and speaker with a blog called Michelle's Mission, where I write about life with a learning disability and feature my photography on my little store. And I also have a learning disability myself.
Let's talk about that one.
Sure.
So, and that's the part I really like is that, well, we're going to get into it. So
Hmm.
let's take it back to kindergarten,
Yes.
shall we?
Sure. That is when I'm in kindergarten, is when I officially got diagnosed with having a learning disability. My kindergarten teacher saw that I was really struggling with things such as counting and tying my shoes, writing my name. Dot to dot pages were also a really big challenge for me. I would go in and I thought, oh, I did a great job. And I got it back and I'm like, oh, okay, this wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. And I was also struggling socially. But a lot of that was because I was my parents' first child. I was an only child for 13 years, so I spent a lot of time with adults. And my teacher saw this and she recommended that I get tested for having a learning disability. This wasn't the first time my parents heard this, though. I had a preschool teacher that thought something was going on too, but she didn't know exactly what it was. So
Okay.
my parents sent me to kindergarten, and sure enough, after they tested me, I have a learning disability. And when they diagnosed learning disabilities during that time period, it was more of an umbrella term. It wasn't specific ones, unless it was dyslexia, which I don't have. They did know one thing: I was not going to be a math genius whenever I was 5 years old. We knew that, which is fine. And I had to repeat kindergarten the following year in a different school, and it was really different.
Why a different school? Like because the school is specialized?
It was still in our district, and it was still a public school, but that's where they sent my parent. That's where they told me my parents that I would be going. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean later they did develop services closer with the school district to where I was at, but I went to a different school in our district, and it was actually a really interesting year. My second year of kindergarten, I had a first grade class in the morning that was more like a homeroom, and then I went to learning support for the rest of the morning, ate lunch with the first grade class, and had kindergarten in the afternoon. It was really interesting. Whenever it was picture day, the poor photographer probably was very confused on taking my picture for kindergarten and first grade. I know I had a lot of students who didn't quite understand that. And it was hard those first couple years in school. I,
Well, that's what I'm thinking, right? Like you're saying
mhm.
the photographer was confused and maybe your classmates were confused, but I mean, you would have only been 5 or 6, so there had
Yeah.
to be an element of confusion for you as well, no?
I think it was more hard for me rather than being confused.
Okay.
I think it was really difficult because I didn't want to go to a different school. I just got adjusted to the school I was at. And it did turn out to be for the best for a lot of different reasons. But I can just remember it was harder. The confusion came a lot later, because I had this concept that I had this disability with learning, and everybody was telling me, well, you can't use that as a crutch. You can't let this define you. And I think that was really confusing, going to sometimes specialized services and going to having an IEP and just being told, okay, you can't use it for a crutch, but we're trying to give you these things to help you as well. I think that was a confusion that did come in my life. And
Mixed messaging, I
yeah,
guess. You require these supports to learn, but you can't use this as a crutch, which also it's like, yeah, that's a confusing message, right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was hard. But and it took me a lot of years to really be able to wrap my head around using that. And I think, though, the really difficult part, though, as a young child, was I was trying really hard to learn, and I wasn't successful with that. It was really frustrating for me. And then socially, it was really hard for me too. I wanted to be accepted like my peers, but I went to a really small conservative school district that if you weren't one of them, you didn't fit in. And I couldn't blend in. I mean, everybody knew that I wanted to learning support. That was really difficult for me. Luckily, I have a great set of parents who really, they never gave up on me. They had me, we had a lot of long, cheerful homework sessions where we studied, and but they still had me go to school, even if they knew that I was having trouble with my peers, or if I was going to take a test and I wasn't going to do well. They still had me go to school. And slowly I started to figure out that I was good at reading. And the school noticed that too. They encouraged me to read with expression. And eventually I began in more regular ed classes for reading and science and social studies. And by the time I was in high school, I was in all regular ed classes except for math. So school got a lot easier for me academically. Socially, it got a lot harder for me. I can remember when I was really young, it was, well, I don't want to be your friend, or you're not invited to my birthday party. And whenever I got to high school, I started to see a lot of groups were more defined, and I didn't feel like I fit in with any of them. And a lot of the bullying really increased, and I just felt like I didn't have any friends. And I found a group outside of my school district. It was a faith-based art group, and I started going there, and I wrote for their newsletter, and I found acceptance because I was able to shed that reputation that followed me since I was in kindergarten as being the screw up, or the one that just was the outcast. And eventually that group didn't meet, but I found another group that was an adult writing group that was just a few years, people were just a few years older than I was. And to this day, we still meet 20 some years later, once a month, to talk about writing. We're meeting this weekend, and we became really close friends. We're in each other's lives with weddings and vacations and birthdays, and they got to see me not only grow as a person, but as a writer as well. And I can remember just coming in, writing this poetry, and it wasn't that great at that age, but I had a friend that really encouraged me. You should really write about having a disability. And I didn't take her up on that advice till many years had passed. And another thing that was really difficult during my school years was what I was going to do after school. I knew that I wanted to go to college, but I had a lot of people who said I wouldn't be able to do that. I had a learning support teacher that said I couldn't handle college. I had a psychiatrist who told me that I wouldn't go beyond community college. And I was even told that my job choices would be limited with that. And after graduation, when I went to college, I had to wrap my head again around getting accommodations, because there was this huge stigma that using them was an unfair advantage. And when I didn't use them, my grades really suffered. And it wasn't until I used them that I started to see some improvement. I was able to pass my classes, and for a while, I graduated with an associate's degree in early childhood education. I moved out on my own. I had a good life. I had my apartment, which was really nice because it was in a central location because I'm not able to drive with my disability, and was enjoying having that independence and working some temp jobs. But I was wanting more for myself, and due to financial reasons, I had to move back in with my parents. And I thought, this is the time to give university a try. And this time when I went back, I found a program that interested me and had disability accommodations. And I used them, and I did really well with using them. I was able to be on Dean's List for a semester. My grades improved, and I graduated with a bachelor's degree despite being told I couldn't do it.
I love that so much. Yeah, you stuck it to them, kind of, right? Like, and I love that because based on what you've said so far, I think we're in the same age group. So this is probably like, kindergarten in the 80s.
Yes.
And then, yeah, so, and like I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm sure there might be some questions. So like, if I ask you a question you're not comfortable answering, please tell me and we'll just, right?
Sure.
So it's a safe space. So I don't want you to feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
So in the 80s, it makes sense to me that it would have been an umbrella term of learning disability, and they really wouldn't have had the tools necessary to go granular and maybe make an appropriate diagnosis at that time that would have even aided you better, right? At what point, or at any point throughout your childhood or teenage years before going off to college, were you able to get a refined diagnosis?
Not really whenever I was a teenager. We did a driver's license evaluation because we knew I could trip over air, and anytime a ball came in contact with me, I was going to be clumsy. So we understood somewhat that I have visual perception issues. We just didn't know the impact. So that was one of the things that I got tested for. Past everything, I couldn't drive. We knew that, and that was like 100 pounds were lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't until we found out about things like hand dexterity until I was an adult, and I was thinking about going back to grad school, and I needed accommodations for my test, and I had to go through yet another evaluation. And at this time, I finally had math handicap it's listed on my evaluation, and they didn't call it dyscalculia, but they did put math disability on there. And I have limited hand dexterity in both of my hands, and it's pretty extensive for what it is. And so the light bulb just went off after I found that out, because it made sense why my handwriting wasn't very good. I can remember I got a W on my report card. I think it was in second grade, indicating weakness because of my handwriting. I also, things would fall out of my hands, and people said, "Oh, she's just clumsy." And
for anyone listening, and I assume that most people know what dexterity means, but it's just a lack of fine motor skills in your hand. So where you can pick up a piece of paper without even thinking about it. Someone who has difficulties with dexterity would actually struggle with that. It would be like picking up a piece of paper with a pair of like plastic tongs. The grasp is there, but the grip's not there, so it sometimes slips through.
Exactly, and it really became an impact with opening up doors and also unlocking doors and trying to work locks with my hands, and using a can opener. I have to use an electric one, and we have jar openers that I can open if my hands don't want to cooperate at that time. And they didn't know about stuff like that whenever I was younger. They really didn't know that. And in fact, even the testing was funny. I can remember it's an 8-hour evaluation for everything. And I was ordering lunch in, And they were testing my hand dexterity at the time, and I'm putting shapes in a shape sorter blindfolded when my food got delivered. So I had to sign the receipt being blindfolded. So that was always the funny story that I thought about. Oh, that's how they found out. But yeah, so that was one of the testing got a lot better. And they didn't even know very much about nonverbal learning disabilities. I mean, we still don't have that on the DSM, but it's something that's coming up that a lot of people might have.
I have a question for you now.
Mm-hmm.
You just used this word that I cannot pronounce yet, but I remember seeing it just recently referenced in an article, and I'm like, well, what is that? And meant to Google it, but it starts diff.
Okay.
You just said that word, not dyslexia.
Dyscalculia?
That one.
Uh-huh.
So for me and everyone at home, I've surmised now through conversing with you that it has to do with number.
Yes, it does. And I don't see numbers backwards, but I have a real hard time with how numbers work.
Okay.
So whenever I was really young, counting was hard. I'm not great at it. It was really hard for me to memorize math facts. I still cannot, to this day, after all those flashcards, cannot tell you a random math fact. I mean, I know some of them, but I couldn't tell you all of them. I'm also not able to read the face of the clock. I can see the numbers. I can see the hands on the clock, and I can see the little lines, but they don't really mean a whole lot to me. So I have a Fitbit or other digital items that I can use. I also cannot use a ruler. That can be really hard. It affects my directional concepts of east, south, west, and that's difficult for me. And that also goes in with the driving. And also, I confuse my right from my left. And that can be really hard for people to understand. I remember whenever I worked in childcare, people couldn't understand why I couldn't put the shoes on the feet the correct way for the kids. My brain just can't tell when I get a pair of shoes. Even on myself, I'll have to put the shoes on and see how comfortable they are. Otherwise, I mean, I have no way of knowing which one's my right foot or my left foot. And it just kind of, yeah.
That is, now I'm going to Google this and go on a research because I find this really interesting because what you had mentioned earlier is that you really didn't get math as a child, but then everybody started to realize that you could read well and you could do all of these other things. And by the time you got into high school, you were attending regular education classes, except for math, right?
Exactly.
And so, oh gosh, Dyscalculia? Did I say it right?
Yes, that's
Okay,
totally
worth it.
Yeah.
So, has there been research into is this it sounds neurological? Is it a developmental type thing?
It's a neurological. It's a type of a learning disability, is what it is. People with it just have a learning disability, but instead of struggling with language or other types, that this is just another part that I have.
But I can understand how this can be very challenging for someone in a world where just numbers are everywhere, right?
Yes.
I'm curious, can you cook and use measurements?
When I measure, I have to have the measuring cup that is very specific. It has to say on there 1 cup, half a cup. I have to have that, or else I'm totally lost. If you give me a graduated cylinder that has the little things on there, I'm like, okay, I have a beautiful one that's in my kitchen, but I can't tell you. It's really hard for me to use that. It can be hard if I'm converting a recipe. I can't tell you how to do fractions with that, how much I have to do to Of course, I can double, but I cannot give you an exact number. Oh, I have to add this amount of flour, or I have to take away this much to get it where it's at. Sometimes I might just do consistency with that. And it can also affect with executive functioning, just trying to put everything together with that. It can really it can be hard to do.
I can only imagine, really, like, because I feel like numbers come in with like planning and execution of certain things,
Yep.
um, lining things up and timing things. And so if you have a learning disability in that area, the areas in which it would affect your life would be vast.
Yes, I mean yeah, budgeting's really something that's hard for me, knowing how much money we have, how much I need to save, how much we're spending. It can be hard, it's hard for me when I go to the store to know how much I'm spending, especially if I use a debit or a credit card. That's an abstract concept, and it's always a surprise when I go to the register, which I'm sure it is for a lot of people nowadays, but for me, it always is a surprise. Surprisingly, though, there is one thing that really helps. If you give me $20, I can go in a range. I can't give you the exact thing, but I can get a range of how much I'm spending, and I can see the dollars and I can see the change, and that helps me to be able to understand that better.
Because you have
I
the tangible
Yeah,
pieces.
I can just see
Okay.
that. Yeah, and if you give me a debit card, it's like, oh, I can't see the numbers or that sort of thing. So that can be more difficult for me. It's also really hard for me to know how much I'm supposed to leave for a tip. That can be hard. So I have my phone for that. And another thing, all the kids know, do not ask me to help you with math. I get a couple of them that like to be smart about it. They'll say, can you help me with your math? And I'm like, no, sorry, can't do that. Or you know that I can't do that. But sometimes even if I have to help out in a science class and there's math involved, or even when I was in college and they said, oh, science, yeah, okay, you can't do math. I'm sure you can do science. And they don't see that there's a connection with that. Graphs and charts and maps are really difficult for me. And that can just play on a lot of other symptoms. And I think the hardest thing is a lot of times when people see me or I start talking, they think, well, there's nothing wrong with you. We can't see that you can't do math. You speak well. I mean, there's just, we can't see what's going on. So sometimes the disability gets dismissed, or people will think, oh, you'll just catch up, or isn't everybody bad at math? And there's a difference between someone who maybe math isn't their forte and somebody that really has a math disability that impacts their life.
And it's interesting that you bring that up too, because for me, I am always very mindful, and especially now since I've started this podcast and I'm meeting with like very diverse people, of being very mindful of auto speech, because humans have this annoying knack to just sort of want to put labels and stick, things in boxes. And so even when you were talking, there was like a moment when you said something. What did you say? I think it was your left from right was one of them. And then it was your one of the numbers situation. And I had the thought come up. And it's weird for me to say come up because I feel like I always talk from like my gut sort of thing as opposed to my head. And it was like I was about to say, I'm like, I also sometimes, struggle with like fractions. I'm like, no. This is the completely different thing. And like, it's really important, especially when a disability is hidden, to not discount or discredit their experience, your lived experience.
Right.
And like, that wouldn't have been my intention, but it's that auto speech, right? It just comes out. It's like, oh, you're going to be fine. Or like, oh, shall I deal with that sort of thing? I'm assuming that happens a lot.
Yes, it definitely does. I'll give, yeah. I mean, a lot of people will say, well, don't we all struggle with that? And Yes, I mean, I can definitely hear you that it's a struggle, and no, I don't know if you have a disability or you don't. I mean, that's not something that I'm aware of, generally. And also, I'll get a lot of people to say, "Oh yeah, I have a little bit of a learning disability," and I'm thinking, well, you either have one or you don't have. I mean, you can have a mild thing with it, but yeah, and they range because some people might look like mild for somebody, might be something that could be really more profound than someone might realize for that person too. And even if you get someone that has dyscalculia, you put two of them in a room, you've met two people, you met people that have them. Nobody experiences it the exact same way.
Well, I think that's so important too because of the variation,
When I'm
right? And exactly
right.
what you just said is that no two people experience everything exactly the same way. This is another area where we must do better to not discount and discredit. Like, so say I were to meet someone else with dyscalculia and they were to, explain their situation and they seem to be mild compared to what you've explained to me today. And I were to say, oh, well, I had this guest Michelle on and she really struggled with it. That is, you think you're making conversation or you're trying to connect, but you're discounting and discrediting that person's truth, right? And
Right.
everyone has their own truth when it comes to how their disabilities um, impact their life. I don't have a disability, I have a disorder, right?
Okay.
So they're
Right.
they're different completely.
Right.
But how I go through my type 2 bipolar disorder is not how other people will go through a type 2 bipolar
Right.
disorder. So
Okay.
to look at someone and say, oh, type 2 bipolar disorder, well, I know you, I know all about everything. Well, no, that's not true because yes, some of the symptomology may be the same,
Right.
but how I've experienced or how they have experienced, right? The same with you with your disability and someone else with dyscalculia, going to be different. So, such an important conversation to have. So, I love that you met this group of writers that were a little older than you, and you've been friends now for like forever, which is fantastic. Um, you you got an associate's degree. It was in early um childhood education. PC
Yes.
people that's right. So you were able to secure some. Oh my goodness, I'm having a can't speak moment. You were able to secure some, like the extra supports in that particular college, right?
Yes.
What would you say was the biggest challenge in college, learning wise? Not because we know you also struggled socially as well in college and all of that sort of thing. But learning wise, like what was, because it's different than high school. So yeah.
Anything math and science related were always difficult for me. Whenever I got my associate's degree, that was really hard. I never really got out of the beginning, like when you do all the pre-math things, and I was able to get a waiver that I didn't have to take math at community college, but that was also because I was going to the class and not passing anything. I was going to tutoring, and I had definitely the diagnosis. When I went to university and I got my bachelor's degree, that was a different story. I was trying to figure out, okay, we knew math and science were going to be the biggest challenges. And I found a philosophy based math class that I took. And the teacher knew I was really trying. I was going to tutoring. It was really discouraging to fail a lot of tests. And I was able to get a D in the class, and that's all that I needed. And that worked for me. And I can remember a funny story where I was in the very beginning and they thought, oh, you're going to need a science and the advisor was registering for helping register for classes, and this is after telling him I really was not good at math. He said, "How about chemistry?" And I said, "Absolutely not." I think he looked at me with bewilderment, but I knew that was just going to not be a good class. And it turns out that when I came back after the next semester and it was time for to register for classes for spring semester, I asked him about the science. Oh, you're not going to need that. So that really worked in my favor. And I did a lot better being able to do that because I was doing the classes that I was in the program that was right for me.
And what was your program in university?
It was community programming for Americans with disabilities. They call it transition specialists now. And that's the service side of special education. So we learn about how having a disability might impact somebody in their adult life. It prepares people maybe to work in a group home if that's what they want to do, be a paraprofessional. I worked as a therapeutic support staff worker before too. And it opened my eyes with my disability too. And I knew it was already a great program because there was somebody in my life that I knew, and they thought that I had a really easy time growing up and that I could really, if I wanted to learn, I really could. And when she went through that program to become a teacher, she had to take some classes on how with students with disabilities through that program. And it totally changed her perspective after she came out of there. She really knew just how hard it was for me when I was in school. So I knew it was and if you could change her mind, you could change anybody's. And I knew when I finally got to that program that it was already a special one. But when I got in there, I just saw the compassion of all the professors. And once they found out I had a learning disability, they did everything they could to help me too with it. And I was still held up to the same standards, but I did really well in everything.
I love that because, I love that because, first of all, you decided to pursue a career in something that you've lived your whole life in, right? To help others. And I'm sure being in that program probably helped you to many different degrees as well, teach certain things that maybe you weren't aware of. And I love that it was met with such compassion because we shouldn't be creating barriers to educations or opportunities based on disability. There need to be pathways for someone to get their bachelor's degrees, for someone to get their master's, their doctorates, all of that sort of thing. It's not like you're saying to the world, "Oh, I don't like math," and then you're getting exempt from it. No, you have dyscalculia. So math is a hard struggle. And one of the things that inspires me also is that in community college and in university, like, even though you have this, you're still like going at it to try and like do your best and taking tutoring and like all of those things. So there was a persistence in you to continuously do your best, even though you knew you struggled so much with it.
Right. I knew I had to do my part, and and it was hard. I just remember going through it, and I wasn't the most positive person. And I had people telling me, "Oh, shoot for the moon," or "You should be really happy." And that made me feel like I couldn't really express a lot of those feelings. And I can remember telling somebody, I said, I'm sure if you were going through this, people weren't going to be very happy if every time you failed a test or you really struggled. And somebody said, "Oh, well, you never know about that. Maybe somebody would be happy." I've yet to meet the person that is happy when that happens, and it's okay to struggle, but I had to try. I just had to show them that I was doing my best, and everything else just worked out.
Love this so much. So now you are teaching, correct?
I'm a teacher's aide. I work
Teacher's aide.
But I get that opportunity to be in the classroom and read tests to students. I get sometimes that chance to encourage them. And sometimes it's like hearing a recording of myself at that age. I hate my learning disability. I wish I didn't have it. I hate my IEP, and I get that chance to go in. And sometimes I share, and other times I might just say, I'm not good at math. Other times I might get to tell them, I know what it's like. I have a math learning disability myself, and this does not make you stupid. Your brain's just wired differently. And I get that chance to encourage them and to show them how they can advocate for themselves and to ask for help. If I have a student that might have a question for their general ed teacher and they don't know something, and sometimes I don't know everything either, I will go with them and I'll say, okay, you need to ask them. And I show them how to do that. And I've had students that were really afraid sometimes to ask for help. But once they asked for it, they weren't afraid, they weren't crying anymore, and they were able to do that independently.
It's wonderful because I think you have the opportunity from being someone who grew up with a learning disability to truly impact them, right? And for instance, like if you're working with, I don't know what grade you're working with, but if you're working with young, impressionable children who think or are being told somewhere else that they can't do this, that, the other thing because of their disability, well, you're kind of that example that says otherwise.
Right.
And you're there. You've got an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree, and you're now a teacher's aide for special education. You have websites, you have a blog, you have a store, you met a husband, you have a very normal life to me, you know what I mean? Like, so for someone who's young and impressionable and scared how this disability or learning disability or whatever they're dealing with in their lives, they can look at you and say, like, if they're fearful that they have you be able to achieve some sense of normalcy, you're an example of what that looks like. Let's talk about your husband.
Yes.
Where did you meet him?
I met him at an art center that I was volunteering at, and it was totally unexpected. I can't remember. I was walking down the street and I was wearing a red dress, and he thought, who is that girl? Where in the red dress? Where is she going? Well, it turns out he was going to the same place I was. He was playing guitar that night at the art center. And then it turned out we knew mutual friends, and there were places that we were at previously, but we just didn't see each other until the time was right. And I can just remember too, it was an answer to a prayer. I had a lot of broken relationships for him, and I thought, okay, am I ever going to meet someone who's going to love me and love that I have a disability and just see me as a whole person? And I can just remember praying, God, don't send me anybody until it's the right person. And God fulfilled that wish and that prayer. And yeah, we've been married for we'll be married for 9 years coming up in June. And yeah, it's been great.
I love this. And I like that part too, what you just said, where it's like, God, send me, like you wanted to find somebody who loves you as a whole person.
Yep, exactly.
Right? So that's all, and that's so important. If you have to, when you love somebody, you have to love all of them. The good, the maybe different than you're used to, all of that. Like it's very much a package deal, right? It's not like you can turn it off when you get home at 5, right?
Right. And he was the one, I knew he was the right one for me on our first date whenever I told him I had a learning disability. And he asked me, well, how does it make you feel? And nobody ever asked me that before. And I had guys before, or my ex, he was breaking up with me, and he was saying, I think you could drive if you wanted to, and I was tired of taking you places. And my husband from day one was okay with driving me. He knew that was going to be part of the marriage and the package deal. I mean, there has been a learning curve for both of us with being in a relationship. But yeah, I just can't take off this mask of having one. I just can't take that off and say, okay, this is when I'm going to take a break or I'm going to take a vacation from it. It's part of our life and the things that we have that we deal with.
Absolutely. It's we're always baffling and wonderful and awful at the same time to know how people have the capacity for such greatness and goodness,
Yep.
also for such awfulness.
Yep.
Like for your ex, you were this like you could like seriously, like that makes me mad. I'm like, dude, I'm like, really? So I'm like, if you don't want to drive, then tell her that you don't want to drive. She'll find an alternate method. I'm sure you seem like a very independent and determined type person.
Right.
So
Oh yeah, definitely. And that is one thing. My husband might takes me to work in the morning, but I have a sweet coworker that takes me home in the afternoon. And I live close enough that if sometimes somebody's busy that day or they're off or just other things happen, I live close enough that I can walk. And I live in a location where I can walk to the gym and to the store and other places because that's just something that I need to be able to do too. I like having people take me places, but sometimes I need to be able to go and do that when somebody can't, or it's just sometimes I like going and taking a nice walk or being able to do that and have that independence. And that's something I can only do if I live in an area that allows me to do that.
which is super important. And
Yeah.
things would be very different and probably very isolating for you if you were like out somewhere rural,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And then I love my parents, but it was hard because they live out in the country in a rural area. And that was difficult whenever I was going back to school. I mean, they were great about giving me rides as well. But I like having that independence.
Absolutely. And why shouldn't you have that?
Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
Like if you consider all that you've done already in your life, why should you not have that independence?
Right.
So you've been married for almost 9 years in June. You have two cats, one named Jack, one named Sparrow. I got that reference. I don't know if people at home got that reference. And like you seem to be doing really well. And I want everyone also to know that Michelle is a photographer.
Yes.
And she has a lot of really beautiful pictures. Just pictures that is that a moth or a butterfly?
I have some moth and I also have butterflies too. There was one on Main Street, they took it with that, and then there's a butterfly. Butterflies and moths, I love them. Along with a lot of
Yes,
other
well, that's why I was
nature.
like, I stopped right away. I'm like, oh my God, it's so pretty.
Thank you.
Lots of gorgeous things there. And then she also she has made these cute notebooks, like adorably cute notebooks. And my impulse shopping person has to prevent myself from like ordering them all. And then you sell prints of your photography on there as well. And there's some really lovely pieces in there. So you can find Michelle at michellesmission.net and her blog.
Yes.
You can also follow her on Instagram at Steiner, Steiner 7250. And then on her Facebook page, which is a long number, so I'm going to link that one.
Yes, please do.
And not read that out. There's one thing I wanted to say, I wanted to talk to you about as well. So your message to others is to always follow your dream.
Yes.
So there's something you said there that really sort of resonated with me. And that was the part where you wanted to tell them that success
doesn't always come in the package that you expect, but sometimes it comes into something even better.
See, I love that. Right? Because I think that it's so important because we're in such a time where people are tuning in and dialing into like sort of manifestation and like really like going after their dreams. And I mean, that's what I'm doing in 2024. Like I've stepped so far out of my comfort zone with starting a show. and talking to people and all of that sort of thing that, you know, but sometimes I think we're all a little bit too in our heads, and we have this perfectly planned out idea of what success would be to us.
Yep.
And the message really is a great message because it's not always going to look like we wanted it to
Yep.
look, but it's probably going to be better,
Exactly.
right?
Yes, agreed.
And so, what's next for you? Any big, like, new achievements? Anything that you want to, like, cross off a bucket list?
I definitely want to write some books about dyscalculia, especially I have a children's book I want to do, and because I think it's really important that a lot of people understand what learning disabilities are. I'd also like to write about my life story with comparing it with the transformation that a butterfly goes through, because that's another passion of mine, and just to continue on with my blog and helping other people that have disabilities.
I love it. So we shall expect a book in the future from Michelle Steiner. I love the idea of children's books about learning disability because
Yes.
how great to teach them in a fun and sort of imaginative way, right? And to also to normalize, because I know that you said that growing up when you were in school, like there was bullying and
Right.
people didn't want to be friends. And like, I'd love to be able to say to the world that that no longer exists, but we know that kids can be cruel to people who are different. And I think it's so important that we teach our children to be kind. And kindness starts at home, right? So
Right, exactly.
if you can teach
I
your
agree.
children by leading by example to be kind to people who are different, who have learning disabilities. And remember to not discredit or discount
Right.
someone's disability because it may very much be hidden,
Right. Agreed.
right?
I
And just
agree.
it's interesting because like I think, you know, people who would be watching or listening, when people say disability, they automatically they form a vision, an image in their mind, right? And
Right.
because that's what we was plastered on TV and all of that stuff growing up. So we have this sort of subconscious vision of what a person with a disability looks like. But that's not actually accurate. And so we have to
Right.
challenge those beliefs that we have
Right.
to recognize that disabilities are hidden. They look different than what we might have been taught or think that they're going to look
Right.
like, all of that sort of thing.
Exactly.
So writing books, children's books, that's what's next.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's great. You are an inspiration.
Thank you.
I love that you get to work with kids today and help them with their learning disabilities and continue doing the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you.
All right. Well,
All
thank
right.
you so much for coming on and being a guest with Poddin Noggin.
Okay.
And to everyone who's at home, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.